series, what I'm going to do, which is basically all to do with the bicycle. The plan is to do a few short videos explaining all the basic fundamental things about the bicycle, terminology, so all the different names for things. I've stripped a bike which is behind me, a frame. I'll go through the frame, that'll be the first episode, and then also I'll be building the bike back up and explaining all the different components that make up a basic bicycle. Now I'm not going to go into, because there's a lot of different bikes in the world. There's a lot of different types. There's full suspension mountain bikes, there's road bikes, there's gravel bikes, there's electric bikes, chopping bikes, cargo bikes. There's endless amounts of bikes, but I want to just concentrate on the basic fundamental things that you'll find on most bikes, whatever you use. There'll be certain names and terminology which you will come across. Right, as you can see, I've got a frame here. This is my wife's frame. It's just as an example. It's got no rear suspension, so it's classed as what they call a hardtail. This is a mountain bike frame. So mountain bike with no rear suspension tends to be called a hardtail. Obviously, if you had suspension, well, I'll go through that in a moment. But I'll just go through all the basic terms for the different parts of a bicycle frame, starting at the front. Now, whatever bike you've got, it'll have somewhere to put the forks in the frame. So if you have something like, your forks will go in the frame, and this part of the frame is called the head tube. And in here you will have components which are called the headset. I'll go through that when I build the frame back up, just to explain to what that is, but for the purpose of this video, that's the head tube. And then from the head tube you have another tube going down here which is called the down tube, and then on the top you have the top tube. Both these tubes join up with the seat tube, which is what the saddle goes into, or your seat tube. Your seat post goes into the seat tube of the frame, and at the bottom you have where the pedals spin. I'll just explain it like that for the moment until we get into details of each component. So this part is the bottom bracket. It's called, you'll often hear the word bottom bracket. Well, this part, the actual metal part here, the construction part, is called the bottom bracket shell. They come in different types. This one is threaded. There's a thread inside there. You can have other sorts which have no thread. You have different sizes and different widths. This one is 68 millimeters wide. It's like a standard size. A lot of road bikes will have this size. Or general bikes will have this size width bottom bracket shell. 9 times out of 10 they'll have a thread. A lot of old bikes will have a thread. A lot of the newer bikes, especially road bikes, a few years ago they went through a spell of having no thread, and you just press the bearing in. It was called a press fit bottom bracket, and you pressed it in, and it relied on the crank, the pedal part of the system, pinching that together and holding it all in the frame. Not so popular. They can creak. The bearings, because there's no thread and they're just pushed in, sometimes with all the forces of pedaling, because there's a lot of force goes through this part of a frame. When you each foot pedals down, it wants to twist this part, so sometimes the bearings could creak. So a lot of people have moved away from press fit bottom brackets and gone back to this type of threaded bottom bracket. Now, you got, like I mentioned, you got down tube, top tube, seat tube, and then off the back of this you've got a chain stay, which is called the chain stay. This is obviously where the chain is. So it comes from your crank, your sprockets, or whatever you want to, where your pedals are. And your chain goes through here, round through your gear system, and then round in a loop. So this is the chain stay. This at the top here, coming from the seat tube, is the seat stay. So seat stay at the top, chain stay at the bottom. Both of these tubes meet here at the rear. This is where the wheel obviously goes in, and this part here is called the dropout. So you've got two left and right. On this side you've got the drive side, what they call the drive side, where the chain is, and the cranks, the sprocket is all on the drive side, which then connects, the chain goes through your derailleur system, which I'll talk about when I build the bike back up. If you're wondering why this is hanging here, it's because I've got internal cables. to go inside the frame, and to take all this off it means stripping all this out, and I don't really want to do that, but for the purpose of this video we'll just leave that dangling. Now this frame, there's different types of dropout. This is what they call a bolt through. So a lot of the new frames now come with a bolt through axle. It's a larger axle, and there's a hole for it to go through, and just screws into the other side and holds the wheel in. It's a sturdier, simpler system. The older system, which I'm not sure I have an example of, or have I? Let me just check. Well, I sort of. Actually, I have. If you can see this, up here there's another frame, and here you'll see, just bear with me a second, the silver part there is where the wheel sits, and it's a slot, and the wheel, you'll probably be more familiar with this, where the wheel slots into a part of the frame. And this is basically called the dropout. The reason it's called a dropout is the wheel can drop out. See this slot? So the wheel would drop out of there traditionally, but the newer bikes have got this bolt through system, but they've kept the term dropout, because these are, that's what they had to have a name of some description. Now on the gear side, the drive side, as I say, with the chain, there'll be a part of the frame here. This is called the derailleur hanger, or mech hanger. You'll often hear those terms. And this is the derailleur or rear mech. There's two ways of calling it. And this bolts to the frame via this component, this part here. Now this is replaceable, and it's replaceable for a reason. Should you damage this, you could often, if this part is worn, sometimes it can catch in the spokes of the wheel. When you go up into the top gear, it'll be tap 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 on the spokes, and it can catch, and it can rip this off, potentially damaging the frame. If you've got an aluminium or carbon, or in this case steel frame, titanium frame, this part here is replaceable, because if it was fixed or welded to the frame, you could damage the whole frame, and that could be quite expensive. So this bit here is replaceable. This just unbolts, this comes off. Now, unfortunately, up until recently, you would have to get the exact dropout. This is a dropout, sorry, the exact mech hanger, the exact one to fit the frame you have, the make of frame. And there are hundreds. So if you've got a more traditional frame, you need to find out, you'll need to look up the make of the bike, the model, and look for the correct mech hanger or derailleur hanger to fit that bike. If you've got one of the very new bikes, there's a company called SRAM who make all the components, the drivetrain and things, and they've come up with a new design of derailleur hanger, and it's a universal one. So it's one design that fits everything. If it's if the frame is designed to take it, so a lot of the new frames are, our new frames are, you'll have this new design of hanger, which is called a UDH, Universal Derailleur Hanger. Unfortunately, it's new, it's coming, but a lot of the old stuff, if you've got an old bike, you won't have that. So derailleur hanger for the derailleur to hang on. So that's the basics of this bike, this frame. Like I say, there's no rear suspension. The front of the frame, sometimes you may hear the term front triangle, because obviously this is triangular. So they'll sometimes call this, the front triangle of your bike. You want to put a bag in the front triangle or something like that. Or your bottle cages will fit inside the front triangle. So you may hear that term. And obviously you've got the rear triangle, which is where all the wheel goes and your gears and your chainstay and seat stay. So there's things you may come across. When it comes to seat tube, this is the seat tube, as I say. At the top, you will have a seat clamp. This is a seat clamp, which just sits on the top of there. And this is to clamp the seat post, which goes in the frame, which I will show when I build the bike up. I'll show you that. But so this basically is there to squash this part of the frame to pinch the seat post to stop it falling down. You'll see there's a slot here. different frames have this slot in different places. Sometimes you may have one in the front and the back, or just in the front or just in the back. Depends on the sort of frame you have. This one has got it at the back because this frame is very small and there's just not enough room. And then the seat clamp, obviously that's got a slot as well, so it can clamp together, and you just line up the slot with the slot. And then when you put your seat post in, you tighten this up. Now you'll also come across quick release seat clamps, which are, have I got one? I thought I had one. No, I do not. So basically it will have a lever on here which you can flip open, and it will release this quickly without a bolt. I thought I had one here. That's a shame, but I'll show you a picture of it. And it just means that you can just click this lever over and it will release the seat tube, so you can raise your saddle or your seat post up and down to whatever height you want. Right, I think that's covered the basic principle. The other thing is, if you have a bike with rear suspension, the only other things you're going to come across, obviously you'll have your shock. So that's the shock absorber or the spring which works the rear end of the bike, the seat stay and chain stay. And there's various designs. I'll put some pictures up with some names, and that'll explain the basically, there's a couple of basic designs of rear suspension. There's a single pivot, which is basically one pivot point, and then the rear triangle or swing arm, depending on the design, will pivot on one point. So that's the only pivot it'll have. And off the back of this, you'll have a shock absorber into the frame somewhere. It'll either be that way or could be that way. But that's basically what you'll have at the back. So you'll have a shock working. If it's got one bolt and it all pivots off that, that's called a single pivot. If you've got a bike with a shock in the front and what they call a rocker, so a rocker is, you might have a bolt there, bolt there, bolt there, and it'll pivot here. Then down here you'll have your main pivot, and then the back end will have another pivot there or possibly there. Now that's another principle. I won't go into details because I can complicate things basically, but you'll have a shock there, possibly a rocker here, and then the rear end will move accordingly. There are so many different designs, it's really difficult for me to explain it in this video, but I'll put some pictures up and I'll put a name of the type of rear suspension so you have an idea. So that covers the first part of this series. It's a series basically to do with, like I say, to do with the bicycle, all the different terminology. So this one just covers the frame and the different terms, and then the next one will be me building the bike back up, and I'll explain all the different components, and then we'll see how far we go. I'm not going to make these videos too long, so it may have to split this next one up. I'm going to go into obviously fitting the gears, fitting the pedal part and the wheels and all the rest of it. So I'll go through those stages. So keep an eye out, obviously subscribe to the channel if you want to watch this series. If you are a bike nerd and you're a mechanic, then you probably know all this. I'm just preaching to the converted. But if you're a sort of person who's new to bikes, or have got a bike and have never ever got their head around all these different terms, bottom brackets and headsets and all these different things, then obviously this video hopefully will help you realize what they all are. I'll also touch on things like geometry, that are the angles of the frame and what sort of angles do different things, but that's later on. Okay, hope that you found this informative. It's just a short video, and say keep an eye out for more. As always, I've forgotten something. I've got a new Patreon site now. It's free to enter. You don't have to pay anything. There is an option to pay, but it's just £1 if you want to. It's up to you. I will be putting, the people who pay, I'll be putting their names in the end of videos just as a bit of a thank you, but it's not really why I'm doing it. Some people just wanted to pay something. And but it's a free to enter. It's up to 300 people can get onto it for free, so don't leave it too late. And in that on there you will see lots of information about websites, my bikes, videos, and also events that I put on. So that all that information will be in my Patreon site. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video, and yeah, hope to see you on there. Okay, it's free, don't forget. Okay, cheers.